You've probably never thought about this because you've never had to. Turn on a tap, water comes out. Buy a bottle, it's yours in seconds. Clean, safe, drinkable water is so automatic in your life that the idea of dying of thirst probably feels like something that happens in movies, not something that could happen to you. Now picture this instead. You're surrounded by water. Not a little. An entire ocean, stretching further than your eyes can follow. More water than every lake and river on Earth combined. And it will still kill you faster than having no water at all. That's not a metaphor. That's biology. And ancient humans, the ones who fished these waters, sailed across them, built entire lives on their coastlines, understood this danger with a So how did they know? Nobody handed them a textbook. Nobody explained sodium concentration or kidney function. There was no science class, no warning label, no lifeguard shouting from shore. So where did this knowledge actually come from, and how did it spread across cultures that never even met each other? Stay with me because the answer says a lot about how humans learned to survive the things that could kill them. Start with the trap itself because it really is a trap. Seawater is roughly 96.5% water. That sounds almost drinkable. It isn't because that remaining 3.5% is salt, and not a small dusting of it either. Close to 35 grams sit in every single liter, roughly 7 teaspoons. Your kidneys can only flush out a limited amount of salt using a limited amount of water. So when you drink seawater, your body doesn't just fail to get hydrated. It has to spend more water than you just swallowed, just to process the salt back out. Which means the more seawater someone drinks, the thirstier and more dehydrated they actually become. It's a strange kind of cruelty built into the ocean itself. The exact thing that looks like salvation is quietly working against you the entire time. Here's what makes it worse. The human body doesn't have a warning system for this. There's no internal alarm that goes off and says, "This will kill you, don't swallow it." Salt water tastes unpleasant, but not unbearable, especially to someone already dying of thirst. Which means the danger isn't really about taste. It's about a design flaw that evolution never fixed, because for most of human history, drinking seawater simply wasn't a common enough problem to shape our biology around. We were built for rivers, lakes, and rainfall, not oceans. Compare that to a seabird. A gull or an albatross can drink straight from the ocean and be completely fine, because it has something we don't. A gland sitting just above its eyes, built specifically to filter excess salt out of its blood and expel it through its nostrils. Ancient people didn't need a laboratory to learn that. They learned it the way most dangerous truths were learned before science existed. Through consequence. Sailors' logs from centuries ago, some of the earliest written accounts we still have, describe men driven mad with thirst, giving in, drinking from the sea, and dying within days. Sometimes faster than the sailors who drank nothing at all. That's not folklore. That's a documented pattern, repeated across different ships, different oceans, different centuries. The knowledge wasn't inherited from research. It was inherited from watching people die from a mistake and making sure nobody made it twice. And once that knowledge existed, it had to survive somehow, long before anyone was writing anything down. This is where it gets genuinely impressive because completely separate cultures with no contact with each other, Polynesian navigators, who crossed thousands of miles of open Pacific using nothing but stars, wave patterns, and the flight paths of birds, carried fresh water sealed inside hollowed gourds and coconut shells. Coconut itself became something close to an emergency backup, its water naturally low enough in sodium to substitute for real fresh water when supplies were running out. On some islands, coconuts were even planted deliberately along coastlines almost like emergency stockpiles, ready for whoever washed up needing them. Along certain desert coastlines, in places like the Arabian Peninsula and parts of North Africa, communities figured out that digging shallow wells a short distance inland could reach pockets of water that had been slowly filtered through sand and rock, arriving fresh by the time it reached the surface, separated from the salt sitting just beyond it. Some of these wells are thousands of years old and are still in use today, refined over generations by people who understood something about groundwater long before hydrology existed as a science. Some ancient writings, Greek and Arab texts among them, describe something startlingly close to distillation. Aristotle himself wrote about evaporating seawater and condensing the vapor back into freshwater, describing it almost like a party trick, without fully realizing he'd stumbled onto the same principle every modern desalination plant still uses today. Sailors would later apply this at sea in a rougher, more desperate form. Boiling seawater in a pot, catching the rising steam, and collecting it as it cooled back into liquid, leaving the salt behind. Nobody called it desalination, but they understood the exact principle behind it, thousands of years before it had a scientific name. Here's the part that's easy to miss. Every one of these solutions came from people who had almost nothing, and had never seen the inside of a laboratory, working out the same conclusion that modern chemistry would later confirm with instruments and equations. That the ocean can only give you life if you know exactly how to take it, and never directly. Because directly, it takes something back and it does it fast. Within hours of drinking seawater, thirst doesn't fade. It worsens. The salt pulls water out of your cells to try to dilute itself in your bloodstream, which is the opposite of what your body needs. Within a day, the body starts rejecting it through vomiting, trying to get rid of what it just took in. Within 2 to 3 days, dehydration turns into disorientation, then hallucination. Sailors adrift for long periods reported seeing land that wasn't there, hearing voices, sometimes even believing the sea itself was speaking to them. And eventually, without intervention, it ends in organ failure. This is why nearly every historical account of survival at sea repeats the exact same warning, sailor to sailor, generation to generation, almost word for word across completely different languages and centuries. No matter how unbearable the thirst becomes, never drink from the sea. One sentence, repeated for centuries, carved into survival manuals, whispered by captains to nervous new crew before long voyages. And it likely saved more lives throughout history than almost any technology that came after it. So if not seawater, then what did they actually rely on? Rainwater was the most valuable resource on any ship, collected in barrels, stitched animal skin containers, or whatever could catch a downpour during a storm. Sailors would rig sails and canvas specifically to funnel rain into containers the moment clouds appeared, because a single storm could mean the difference between surviving the next 2 weeks or not. The fluid inside a freshly caught fish, noticeably less salty than the ocean around it, was used in true emergencies to buy a little more time, something recorded in survival accounts from sailors who had run out of every other option. Some coastal communities even kept detailed knowledge of which fish held the most usable fluid, passed down the same way recipes are passed down in a family. And in the most desperate situations, something almost poetic. Morning dew, condensing quietly on cloth and sails overnight, wrung out drop by drop into something barely resembling enough water, but just enough to survive one more day. Some accounts describe entire crews waking before sunrise specifically to harvest dew before the heat of the day burned it away, treating a few damp cloths like the most valuable cargo on the ship. None of it was easy. None of it was pleasant. But it worked because it respected one rule the ocean never breaks. It gives constantly, and it takes just as constantly, and the line between the two is thinner than most people ever realize. And maybe that's the real reason this knowledge survived so consistently across cultures that never met. It wasn't stored in a book that could be lost or burned. It was stored in fear, passed from a parent who'd seen someone die of it, to a child who'd never forget the warning. That kind of knowledge doesn't fade. It gets carried in stories, in songs, in the tone of voice an elder used when they said, "Never drink from the sea," a tone that made sure nobody needed to ask twice. So the next time you're standing somewhere with water in every direction, remember what that same view meant to someone standing there thousands of years ago. Not comfort, not scenery. A test they'd already learned how to pass the same way every generation before them had, by watching, by losing people, and by refusing to make the same mistake twice. If this kind of thing fascinates you, ancient humans figured out a lot more long before modern science ever caught up to them. Subscribe, because next time we're going somewhere even stranger.